Victor Frankenstein from Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll from The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are prime examples of why STEM majors need humanities courses. I just finished my reread of Frankenstein a few days ago because I wanted to prepare for watching Frankenstein 2025 in theaters, which I also have done at this point. And today, since it's Halloween as of the time that I'm filming this, I wanted a short spooky read, and so I read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for the first time because I was curious about it and because it was available, and also because I thought I had known the story, but I didn't realize that the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was one of those things where the big plot twist became so popular in popular culture that it's kind of like the only thing people know about it and often get a little bit wrong about it. These are ultimately two novels, two stories, two characters, two central characters that end up creating these monstrous beings because they are incapable of thinking outside of themselves, because they refuse to think about the moral or ethical concerns that go into these experiments that they're conducting, because they don't think about how creating these other beings, these other people, would impact other people around them. In the story of Frankenstein, a young Victor Frankenstein is finishing up his first year at university. He grew up very wealthy, very comfortable with a loving family, a two-parent household who loved him very dearly. He grew up very precious. But recently, his mother passed away, and this was a major loss for the family, especially because there are young children in this family. Victor has this younger brother who everyone also loves very dearly. But the loss of his mother is sort of the first and only tragedy, the only struggle Victor knows. And so he fixates on it greatly. He fixates on the death element and begins this obsession and this curiosity surrounding curing death, defeating death. And so he thinks about this idea to successfully reanimate a corpse. And in his college apartment, not a lab because he's not a doctor, he's a reckless idiot, he starts taking the pieces of dead, rotting bodies that he's stolen from graves. He becomes a secret grave robber. And he doesn't talk to anybody about these plans to take the best parts from all of these different bodies and stitch them together into a gigantic 8-foot-tall man in his apartment. He starts studying alchemy and other ways beyond and incorporating science. And this is his obsession. He's thinking about defeating death. He's thinking about the fame and notoriety. He's thinking about playing God. And then, by some miracle, it works. His experiments are successful. The creature, this stitched together puzzle of a man, wakes up, and Victor loses his shit because things got way too real, despite this being his entire life building up to this. Literally, the creature opens his eyes, smiles, and reaches for Frankenstein, and Frankenstein is so disgusted with this creature. He's so horrified at fully understanding what he just did. And then Frankenstein proceeds to run away and then run into a friend of his and go traveling and disappear for 2 years, effectively trying to pretend like none of this ever happened, which I think plays in very heavily with his age and being so young. He tackles this conflict like a child would by just ignoring it and hoping that it goes away on its own. Like when you're playing hide and seek with a toddler and they cover their own eyes because if they don't see you, you can't see them. Everything's disappeared between the two of you. And then all of a sudden, after these 2 years pass, Victor comes home. He's struggling with depression ever since his mom died, but exasperated by the creation of a person that really should not exist, this abomination of a man. He comes home to find that his baby brother, this small child in his family, has been brutally murdered, has been strangled to death out of nowhere, with the only evidence pointing to the beloved servant in the family, a servant who everyone loves, who loved this child very dearly as well. And Frankenstein knows immediately, before hearing anyone's side of the story, before seeing any proof, before the investigation really even takes off, that the creation did it, that the thing he made is responsible. He just can't prove it. Also, nobody knows about this, so he can't just say, oh, I know who did it, because then everyone will also know what he did creating it. The servant is successfully framed for this tragic murder and is also put to death. And then the creation finds Frankenstein and admits that, yes, he did do that. It also demands that he have his story told, because this is a gigantic, fully articulate, vengeful, angry man. And so we get the creation side of the story, and he retells his moments from the last time Victor also saw him, which was his rebirth. The creation wandered in the wilderness and stumbled across a cabin or a cottage with this very loving, random family of working class farmer people. And he goes into this like shed offset room of the cottage and watches this family exist in their day-to-day lives for these couple of years. Through monitoring and watching over this family, not only does he learn language, he learns to understand language, he learns to speak, he learns to read and write. He also learns about religion, he learns about ethics, philosophy, politics. He also learns about love. He learns about how to care about other people. And not only is he watching this family of people take care of each other and love each other very dearly, but he has developed care and love for this family who has no idea that he's living with them. And Frankenstein starts doing things for this family because they're working class, they work themselves to the bone, they're hardly able to spend time with each other, so then he decides to be a secret helper with the family. He helps to do certain chores and activities in order to give the family more time to rest and be with one another. It's his gift to them for their gift to him, for teaching him so much about life. And they have no idea what's going on. They're like, oh my God, there's a mysterious good Samaritan near us. And that's enough for the creation for a little while. But he desires connection in a more tangible way. And so he starts thinking about all these different ways that he can get into contact more directly with these members of the family. But he knows what he looks like. He knows he's terrifying. His creator ran away in disgust and horror at the sight of him. So he thinks, okay, I'm going to introduce myself to the old man of the family who is blind. And he does. He has a conversation with him, and things are going smoothly until the other members of the family come home and see him and scream in horror and attack him out of fear, violently rejecting the creation from this family he held so close to his heart. And it's in this moment that the creation truly understands that he's sort of destined, very tragically, to be alone forever. Because the only people he can really connect with are human beings, and he's human being adjacent, but he's also the only one of his kind. Human beings are his only option for community, but they'll always reject him at every turn. And he gets proven right time and time again with every single interaction he has with a human being, including Frankenstein's baby brother, who the creation doesn't realize is Frankenstein's brother at first. The creation sees this little boy out and about and decides to not conduct an experiment, but attempts connection. The creation's logic is humans are cruel, but children are innocent and pure and unshapen by prejudice. They're not capable of harboring the same deep-rooted hatred like an adult can. So maybe my entry point to human connection is forming a bond with a child who's innocent and pure, won't be biased against me. So he attempts to talk to this child who is terrified and disgusted by him. And in this interaction where the small boy is lashing out at him out of fear, the small boy drops that he is a Frankenstein, that he's from the Frankenstein family. Creation absolutely just snaps. He has this moment where he's like, oh, you're a member of the family of my enemy. He's so sick of humanity. He's so sick of being lonely. He's so sick of Victor Frankenstein ruining his life. And so he strangles this little boy to death and also steals a pendant off of the boy's body and stumbles across a sleeping servant, and frames her for the murder. And his thought process during the framing of the servant is really interesting because it also sets up a separate moral dilemma that comes up later. Creation doesn't really know that this is a servant. He just sees a very pretty sleeping woman. And he has this moment where he's like, I wish a beautiful woman would look at me with warmth and love and care. But I know if she were to wake up right now, she would be so disgusted with me And so I hate her for that. And so out of a desire to create mischief, a concept that he learned from humans, and also to punish her for being a human that would be disgusted by him, he leaves the evidence of the murder on her body to frame her, directly causing the death of these two innocent people that he really does not feel remorse for at all, despite knowing that they've done nothing to create his circumstances. It was a small child who didn't know you, and a sleeping woman who doesn't even know what happened, who never saw you to begin with and died not knowing how exactly evidence of the murder even got on her person. The creation discusses all of this leading up to the present with Frankenstein and talks in depth about his feelings towards Frankenstein, how much hatred and anguish he exists in now, how he never asked to be created, yet he's constantly punished for it. He's so lonely, how he sees the relationship he has to Frankenstein as being the same as Adam to God, and how it hurts so much more that in this comparison, his God wouldn't even give him a name. The creation is never given a name. And even after expressing so much pain over that element, he still is not given a name. And so the creation strikes this deal with Frankenstein, and he's like, if you give me a female version of me, if you make another one of me, but a female, to be my companion, I will take her, we will hide out in some cave somewhere. Humanity will never see us. I will never hurt anyone ever again. It's a done deal. But she has to be hideous like me. We have to be the same in every way so that I cannot be lonely anymore. And you're going to do this, or I'm going to keep killing people in your life. And Frankenstein agrees to this initially, but then gets into his last minute denial of this, which fully sets the creation off. And this denial is really, really interesting because at this point it's really easy to hate Victor Frankenstein for creating a monster. That's what the creation has become through these violent acts. He's become a monster, and this is entirely created from originally Frankenstein, but ultimately from how humanity has treated him. He was born pure and wholesome and loving, but because he was only ever treated as a monster, as someone who is incapable of goodness, then he was pushed into that fate. And so while you can recognize that his actions against these innocent people are objectively horrific and awful, this doesn't take away from how sympathetic and tragic his character is. And so at this point, it's really easy to hate Victor Frankenstein, but it's in his denial of this deal, and it's really shitty, the timing of it, because he does build a woman. He has the body ready, but then last minute he's like, actually no, which is so frustrating. But what's extra frustrating about that is that Victor Frankenstein has a list of very valid, legitimate reasons to say no, and these are only points he got to because he screwed up with creating the first creation. He learned the hard way that his actions have consequences. How radical. Frankenstein is essentially like, okay, I cannot do this. First of all, you don't know what she will be like. He's like, just because you turned out pure doesn't mean she will as well. What if, even though you didn't turn out evil, she does? What if she's more violent than my first creation? Also, I can't force her to find him attractive. We both agree that you look hideous. What would stop her from turning away and running away in terror at the sight of you, just like everyone else has? And just because the creation has agreed to always live in hiding and never make contact with humans doesn't mean that the second creation, this woman, this female version of him, has agreed to those terms. There's nothing binding her to these rules. And what happens if the two creations get into conflict and part ways? And there was a really interesting conversation surrounding this denial of a mate, this denial of the bride, right? Because the creation doesn't say that he will only take a partner or a companion in the form of this female version, this female mate. He doesn't even really call it a mate. That's more implied from context clues of this following immediately after he frames the servant woman as punishing her for her hypothetical disgust of him despite being so beautiful herself, and also with the direct consequence of this denial of a female version being punishing Elizabeth, Victor Frankenstein's love. But the creation gives Frankenstein two options. It's just that Frankenstein never even considers one of those options, so like it's easy to forget about. But the creation's like rules of this whole agreement of like even creating a second creation is, if you won't love me, you have a responsibility and an obligation to make something that will love me. And so if Victor's so concerned about like the moral complications of making another creation, the alternative is filling that void of being a present father for once. But then here's the thing. As much as I can't stand Victor Frankenstein for being this absentee father that ruined everything, I also perfectly understand why Victor wouldn't even think at all about being a companion or a friend at all to the creation at this point. Because yes, denying the creation any sort of connection to him is what jumpstarts the creation's downfall. But also, there's no turning back, because at this point, the creation has murdered his baby brother and the beloved family servant. How can Victor ever form any sort of positive bond with this creature, with this man, with his son? You can't just forget his crimes against you, just like he can't forget your crimes against him. It's really impossible to move on from. I mean, who can befriend their sibling's murderer? It's a really big ask. And so Victor sticks to this deal surrounding creating and also not creating a second creation, which adds to the tragedy of the first creation, right? That Frankenstein doesn't realize how unethical and immoral creating a creature like this to begin with is, until he's already done it and doomed this being, doomed this man to a life of misery. And it's only now that he recognizes, through this trial and error, that it is not okay, that it's not fair, immediately after hearing just how miserable this guy's existence is, to inflict that on a new woman that is being asked to be created solely to end this man's loneliness, to be a source of comfort for the creature. And after this denial, the creation comes back around on Victor and Elizabeth's wedding night and murders Elizabeth to punish Victor again. Because in the creation's eyes, it's truly not fair, right? None of this is fair. That the creation is denied a mate because the request is selfish, but Victor Frankenstein, who is the most selfish man he's ever seen, gets to have a wedding, gets married. It's not fair. Like it is deeply unfair. But also so is the murder of Elizabeth. Elizabeth, who doesn't even know what's going on, like truly a background character until it comes to hurting Victor. And the two proceed to sort of commit to chasing each other indefinitely until they die, or at least until the story ends, and it's left sort of open. Like there's no real like solid resolution. The creation just sort of has to let go of his vengeance, despite knowing that he cannot let go of his loneliness. And it's a truly depressing read that is also like endlessly fascinating and so beautifully written and so passionate all the way through. And then there's the novella The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's a super short read and a murder mystery, which was so surprising because I didn't know anything about the story besides, the main thing that Dr. Jekyll made a potion elixir thing and then created this evil alter ego that commits crimes and murders named Mr. Hyde. That was it. I didn't understand his motivations for doing that, for what he was even doing to begin with, until I read the book. And what's so strange about the book, what's so strange about this story is that information that we have, the only thing the general public, pop culture knows about this story is the plot twist at the end. You don't know what is going on with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that they're even the same person until a final chapter. It's a mystery novel. It's a mystery novella. And that really like threw me for a loop. It was one of those things where it's like the big twist in the story is the big thing, or really the only thing people know about it before they go into the work. Like Darth Vader being Luke's dad in Star Wars. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. Even if you've never watched Star Wars, like I knew that before I took an interest in watching Star Wars for the first time. Everyone knows that. And everyone knows that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same person, just two personalities. But actually also not really when you read the book. In the story of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the story is told from the perspective of a friend of Dr. Jekyll. The story is told from the perspective of a Mr. Utterson, who is like a very good friend of Dr. Jekyll. They've known each other for a very long time. And new in town is this weirdo creep, Mr. Hyde, that came out of nowhere. And the description of him is really interesting because in pop culture, in the way Mr. Hyde is depicted compared to Dr. Jekyll, he's like truly monstrous and strange. He's like typically green or something. And there's a heavy emphasis on there being like this great dramatic physical transformation that truly does turn Dr. Jekyll into this unrecognizable separate guy, which is only like partly true. He is totally unrecognizable physically from Dr. Jekyll. The only real like distinct physical change is that Mr. Hyde is like noticeably smaller in stature than Dr. Jekyll. And also that like for reasons people can't really put their finger on, Mr. Hyde is so unsettling and gross to look at. It's a really interesting description. Like people are talking about this new guy, Mr. Hyde, and how he's so mean and evil and weird, just being violent with people for no reason. Then they get to the describing his physical features and describing his face. And they say it like very clear cut. They're like, there's nothing really wrong with him physically. Like there's nothing wrong with his face. He's a perfectly average looking guy, I guess, but there's something so uncanny and off. They talk repeatedly, like a couple of times, about this like invisible deformity. There's something really uncanny about Mr. Hyde where he looks wrong, but then if you're looking at like the bare facts of his face physically, there's nothing wrong. He's just wrong. So people are just like being introduced to this new guy, Mr. Hyde, who like trampled a little girl on purpose in broad daylight. And they see that Dr. Jekyll has paid off this family in order to avoid it being like a big scandal. And that's Utterson's friend. So him and like another guy in the friend group like pull up to Dr. Jekyll and they're like, hey, who is this man and why are you paying off his weird crimes? And Jekyll's like super weird about it. He's like, don't ask me. Don't ask me that, which is the most suspicious route he could have possibly taken. But Jekyll convinces his friends, he's like I really cannot explain to you the details right now, and I probably never will, but I need you to trust me and I need you to ignore all of this, please. And his friends are like, oh, okay, I guess. But the thing about Utterson is that he's an attorney. Like he is the most law-abiding citizen. So he's like, sure, I won't push you about it, but he's not gonna forget about it. Especially not because when the story picks up, next chapter, a year has passed and Mr. Hyde has just murdered a guy. Hyde has just beaten a man to death for no reason and then swiftly disappeared, which launches this investigation that Utterson is kind of leading / heavily participating in. He's very concerned about Jekyll's involvement because Jekyll and Hyde are around each other constantly but never seen at the same time. And Utterson has this also really peculiar, notable moment where he's thinking about like how strange it is that Jekyll would be friends with Hyde in some way, but not because Hyde is so different from Jekyll, which he is. They are polar opposites. Dr. Jekyll is this very well-mannered, kind, gentle, God-fearing man. But the thing isn't just that like they're so different. Utterson makes this note where he's like, they're so different now that Hyde must be associated with Jekyll because of an old connection they have, because Jekyll used to be really rowdy, used to be really defiant and rebellious. Utterson says that like this would make sense if this were a Jekyll of, I don't know, 20 years ago. But to have this connection now is strange because Jekyll has changed. But Utterson is like, okay, I guess Jekyll had that good in him. He got better. I don't know Hyde, so I don't know. Maybe he has some goodness in him. There has to be a reason why Jekyll would want to protect Hyde like this, despite Hyde being so awful to everyone. And they're investigating, and things are getting more and more suspicious and confusing because Hyde has disappeared. Jekyll has disappeared. No one can get a hold of these people. There's these weird transactions that Jekyll has been making to these pharmacies for this special chemical for a special medicine. And there are these notes around, and like this butler Poole, Jekyll's butler, is like, hey, things are getting weird. And then another guy from the main friend group dies. Their friend Lanyon, this other guy who's also been checking up on Jekyll this whole time, he dies, and he's like, not suddenly, and he's not murdered, but it is related to Jekyll and Hyde. He's dying because of the shock of what he's learned about his dear friend Jekyll. Utterson and the investigators are like going to Jekyll's like lab study situation. They know that Hyde is in there. They don't know where Jekyll is, but they know that Hyde has locked himself in Jekyll's space. And they burst down the door. The way Utterson describes them breaking down the door is kind of hilarious. He's talking about how difficult it was to break down that door, how it took them like 5 tries to do it. And he's like, this woodwork is really amazing. Who made this door? He's in a state of panic. He doesn't know where his best friend is. There's been a murder. People are dying. Everything's so weird and mysterious and vague. And he had this moment where he's like, this is a really good door. But they break down the door and they find Mr. Hyde's body post-suicide. And they find him having killed himself wearing Jekyll's clothes. And they're like, that's so weird, because it's also noticeably Jekyll's clothing because, once again, Hyde is physically smaller than Dr. Jekyll. And so we're getting into the final 2 chapters, and they find these like notes within notes connected to notes. And it's one letter written from Lanyon on his deathbed and another letter from Dr. Jekyll. And it's labeled like open in the case of the death or disappearance of Dr. Jekyll. And Lanyon's talking about how he was checking up on Jekyll, and this builds into like the great plot twist. And Lanyon is a fellow doctor and like a pharmacist, like has access to these drugs, and Jekyll wrote to him asking for more of this medicine. And so Lanyon arrives, but Lanyon learns and like recognizes that it wasn't really Jekyll who wrote to him. It was Hyde pretending and like forging Jekyll's handwriting. And Lanyon shows up and he sees Mr. Hyde and he's like, what are you doing here, weirdo? And he watches Hyde drink a medicine. He makes this potion in his lab and he watches him transform into Jekyll. And Lanyon is so shocked and horrified and disturbed by what he has just witnessed and the implications of it all that he dies. He just dies, but slowly, with just enough time to write out what happened. And then that's immediately followed up with Jekyll's letter, which is really like sort of Jekyll and Hyde's letter, because what's interesting about that letter is that Jekyll's talking about what he did with this medicine serum elixir. And he's talking about the actions of Dr. Jekyll, and he's saying I, me, I, and then he's also talking about the actions of Mr. Hyde, and he's like referring to Hyde as he, but then at one point when he's talking about the actions of Hyde, he's saying I, and then he's talking about Jekyll as he. It's like the two are merging in and out of each other, like as he's writing this final note, this final letter explaining what his experiment was, which is that Jekyll recognized that he had this intense darkness within him that was already there. He had these desires and these urges that he just couldn't get away from, that he couldn't remove shame from. And so he comes up with this truly insane idea to create a serum for him to take that would split his identity into 2, to split and remove all of the darkness and all of the bad urges and transform it into like a twin being. He intentionally created Mr. Hyde. Like this part was not the accident. The accident came in losing control over when he would become Hyde, because his logic was that if he can create a situation where like if he just takes this serum and removes all of his guilt and shame and becomes the evil that he wants to do. He can release these urges without shame, without embarrassment, without disgust for himself, and then just take the serum, go back to his original good, pure form, removed from the responsibility of what he did. So Jekyll doesn't think to like kill the badness in him. He's like, no, I'm still gonna let myself be evil. In fact, I'm gonna remove my inhibitions and be very evil. And I'm gonna use my money as Jekyll to pay off the crimes I'm doing when I'm choosing to go be evil. I just don't want to feel bad about it. Zero care for what this means for anyone and everyone Hyde has to interact with. Because this also isn't even a situation where like Jekyll has no idea what he's doing. Jekyll remembers everything Hyde does. He's like conscious of it. And he talks about this change where he becomes Hyde, and that's when he starts switching over to talking about Hyde as like I, me, I, taking ownership of the identity of Hyde and talking about how good it felt to be removed from these like shackles of fear and shame and guilt and remorse. And he had it under control to begin with, where he would only transform when he took the serum intentionally in a very particular way. But then he started going to sleep as Jekyll and waking up as Hyde. And then the breaking point when he knew that he was losing his grip on his two selves was when he suddenly became Hyde in the middle of the day out of nowhere, which is when he beat that man to death. And Jekyll is in a panic because he's trying to take heavier and heavier, larger doses of this medicine, but it's not working. So he's wondering if there's an element of the serum that was faulty before that has now been corrected or something that makes it so it doesn't work anymore. But he knows that he is losing his original self, like he's losing Jekyll to being Hyde full time. And so this letter is being written in Jekyll's final moments of existing before Hyde is the only personality standing, which is now no more because Hyde ended his life. And when it comes to Victor Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll, like these are truly these two scientists that decided to create these beings, to create these whole other individuals in some way without a care on how the world would be impacted by these creations, like by these people, about how these other people were supposed to function in society as individuals, because they weren't seen as people despite being people. Victor Frankenstein didn't see this creation as a human being capable of experiencing pain. He saw it as an experiment to further his journey to defeat death. It was evidence for something that was going to be so much greater than him that ended up overwhelming him in some way and being his downfall. And same with Dr. Jekyll. Dr. Jekyll's is like even more ridiculous and even more selfish and evil and like bizarre, because he recognizes that he made this other person but doesn't recognize that like he has unleashed evil without guilt onto his own neighborhood because it feels good for him, because he's prioritizing his own personal comfort over the safety and well-being of anyone around him. You see it online constantly. You see it in the interactions you have at a college and university level, how common it is for these STEM majors, these engineers and these scientists to be so condescending and so frustrated with the expectation and the requirements to take humanities courses, to take these writing courses, to discuss the world around them and how humans connect to each other and the harm in certain behaviors, because they see it as genuinely very useless. When time and time again we see how these scientists and these great minds are creating things that impact humanity in these very cruel and dystopian ways because they haven't taken into account humanity. They're thinking about numbers, they're thinking about efficiency, and they're thinking about streamlining, and they're thinking about profits and manipulation for political gain, for personal gain. Or if they are aware, they don't understand why they should care, why they should have any sort of emotional attachment to this. So many of these modern tech bros are so averse to and disgusted by the concept of empathy, how it's useless and doesn't serve a tangible function in their eyes. It's like we're stuck in this never-ending loop of Jekylls and Frankensteins being unleashed on the world, creating their monsters and not taking any responsibility for them, and very rarely even acknowledge that harm was done, ever to begin with.